The Secret Teachings of All Ages, by Manly P. Hall. Chapter 5. The Mysteries of Asar-Hapi. The identity of the Greco-Egyptian Serapis, known to the Greeks as Serapis and the Egyptians as Asar-Hapi, is shrouded by an impenetrable veil of mystery. While this deity was a familiar figure among their symbols of the secret Egyptian initiatory rites, his arcane nature was revealed only to those who had fulfilled the requirements of the Serapic cultus. Therefore, in all probability, excepting the initiated priests, the Egyptians themselves were ignorant of his true character. So far as known, there exists no authentic account of the rites of Serapis, but an analysis of the deity and his accompanying symbols reveals their salient points. In an oracle delivered to the king of Cyprus, Serapis described himself thus: "A god I am such as I show to thee. The starry heavens are my head, my trunk the sea, earth forms my feet, mine ears the air supplies, the sun's far-darting, brilliant rays, mine eyes." Several unsatisfactory attempts have been made to etymologize the word Serapis. Godfrey Higgins notes that Ceres was the name given by the Egyptians to a stone coffin, and Apis was Osiris incarnate in the sacred bull. These two words combined result in Ceres Apis or Sorapis, the tomb of the bull. But it is improbable that the Egyptians would worship a coffin in the form of a man. Several ancient authors, including Macrobius, have affirmed that Serapis was a name for the sun, because his image so often had a halo of light about its head. In his oration upon the sovereign sun, Julian speaks of the deity in the words, "One Jove, one Pluto, one sun is Serapis." In Hebrew, Serapis is Seraph, meaning to blaze out or to blaze up. For this reason the Jews designated one of their hierarchies of spiritual beings, Seraphim. The most common theory, however, regarding the origin of the name Serapis is that which traces its derivation from the compound Osiris Apis. At one time the Egyptians believed that the dead were absorbed into the nature of Osiris, the god of the dead. While marked similarity exists between Osiris, Apis and Serapis, the theory advanced by Egyptologists that Serapis is merely a name given to the dead, Apis, or sacred bull of Egypt, is untenable in view of the transcendent wisdom possessed by the Egyptian priestcraft, who, in all probability, used the god to symbolize the soul of the world, anima mundi. The material body of nature was called Apis, the soul which escaped from the body at death but was enmeshed with the form during physical life was designated Serapis. C.W. King believes Serapis to be a deity of Brahmanic extraction, his name being the Grecianized form of Saradalsripa, two titles ascribed to Yama, the Hindu god of death. This appears reasonable, especially since there is a legend to the effect that Serapis, in the form of a bull, was driven by Bacchus from India to Egypt. The priority of the Hindu mysteries would further substantiate such a theory. Among other meanings suggested for the word Serapis are, the sacred bull, the sun in Taurus, the soul of Osiris, the sacred serpent, and the retiring of the bull. The last appellation has reference to the ceremony of drowning the sacred Apis in the waters of the Nile every 25 years. There is considerable evidence that the famous statue of Serapis in the Serapeum at Alexandria was originally worshipped under another name at Sinope, from which it was brought to Alexandria. There is also a legend which tells that Serapis was a very early king of the Egyptians, to whom they owe their foundation of their philosophical and scientific power. After his death this king was elevated to their estate of a god. Philocus declared that the word Serapis means the power that disposed the universe into its present beautiful order. In his Isis and Osiris, Plutarch gives the following account of the origin of the magnificent statue of Serapis which stood in the Serapeum at Alexandria. While he was pharaoh of Egypt, Ptolemy Soter had a strange dream in which he beheld a tremendous statue, which came to life and ordered the pharaoh to bring it to Alexandria with all possible speed. Ptolemy Soter, not knowing the whereabouts of the statue, was sorely perplexed as to how he could discover it. While the pharaoh was relating his dream, a great traveler by the name of Sosibius, coming forward, declared that he had seen such an image at Sinope. The pharaoh immediately dispatched Soteles and Dionysius to negotiate for the removal of the figure to Alexandria. 3 years elapsed before the image was finally obtained, the representatives of the pharaoh finally stealing it and concealing the theft by spreading a story that the statue had come to life and, walking down the street leading from its temple, had boarded the ship prepared for its transportation to Alexandria. Upon its arrival in Egypt, the figure was brought into the presence of two Egyptian initiates, the Umulpid, Timotheus and Mantho the Sebnite, who immediately pronounced it to be Serapis. The priests then declared that it was equivalent to Pluto. This was a masterly stroke, for in Serapis the Greeks and Egyptians found a deity in common, and thus religious unity was consummated between the two nations. Several figures of Serapis that stood in his various temples in Egypt and Rome have been described by early authors. Nearly all these showed Grecian rather than Egyptian influence. In some the body of their god was encircled by the coils of a great serpent. Others showed him as a composite of Osiris and Apis. A description of the god that in all probability is reasonably accurate is that which represents him as a tall, powerful figure, conveying the twofold impression of manly strength and womanly grace. His face portrayed a deeply pensive mood, the expression inclining towards sadness. His hair was long and arranged in a somewhat feminine manner, resting in curls upon his breast and shoulders. The face, save for its heavy beard, was also decidedly feminine. The figure of Serapis was usually robed from head to foot in heavy draperies, believed by initiates to conceal the fact that his body was androgynous. Various substances were used in making the statues of Serapis. Some undoubtedly were carved from stone or marble by skilled craftsmen. Others may have been cast from base or precious metals. 1. Colossus of Serapis was composed of plates of various metals fitted together. In a labyrinth sacred to Serapis stood a 13-foot statue of him reputed to have been made from a single emerald. Modern writers, discussing this image, state that it was made of green glass poured into a mold. According to the Egyptians, however, it withstood all the tests of an actual emerald. Clement of Alexandria describes the figure of Serapis compounded from the following elements. First, filings of gold, silver, lead, and tin. Second, all manner of Egyptian stones, including sapphires, hematites, emeralds, and topazes, all these being ground down and mixed together with the coloring matter left over from the funeral of Osiris and Apis. The result was a rare and curious figure, indigo in color. Some of the statues of Serapis must have been formed of extremely hard substances, for when a Christian soldier, carrying out the edict of Theodosius, struck the Alexandrian Serapis with his axe, that instrument was shattered into fragments and sparks flew from it. It is also quite probable that Serapis was worshipped in the form of a serpent, in common with many of the higher deities of the Egyptian and Greek pantheons. Serapis was called Theon Heptagrammaton, or the god with the name of 7 letters. The name Serapis, like Abrixas and Mithras, contains 7 letters. In their hymns to Serapis the priests chanted the 7 vowels. Occasionally Serapis is depicted with horns or a coronet of 7 rays. These evidently represented the 7 divine intelligences manifesting through the solar light. The Encyclopaedia Britannica notes that the earliest authentic mention of Serapis is in connection with the death of Alexander. Such was the prestige of Serapis that he alone of the gods was consulted in behalf of the dying king. The Egyptian secret school of philosophy was divided into the lesser and the greater mysteries, the former being sacred to Isis and the latter to Serapis and Osiris. Wilkinson is of the opinion that only the priests were permitted to enter the greater mysteries. Even the heir to the throne was not eligible until he had been crowned pharaoh, when, by virtue of his kingly office, he automatically became a priest and the temporal head of the state religion. See Wilkinson's Manners and Customs of the Egyptians. A limited number were admitted into the greater mysteries. These preserved their secrets inviolate. Much of the information concerning the rituals of the higher degrees of the Egyptian mysteries has been gleaned from an examination of the chambers and passageways in which the initiations were given. Under the temple of Serapis destroyed by Theodosius were found strange mechanical contrivances, constructed by the priests in the subterranean crypts and caverns where the nocturnal initiatory rites were celebrated. These machines indicate the severe tests of moral and physical courage undergone by the candidates. After passing through these tortuous ways, the neophytes who survived the ordeals were ushered into the presence of Serapis, a noble and awe-inspiring figure illumined by unseen lights. Labyrinths were also a striking feature in connection with the rise of Serapis, and E. A. Wallace Budge, in his Gods of the Egyptians, depicts Serapis minotaur-like with the body of man and the head of a bull. Labyrinths were symbolic of the involvements and illusions of the lower world through which wanders the soul of man in its search for truth. In the labyrinth dwells the lower animal man with their head of the bull, who seeks to destroy the soul entangled in the maze of worldly ignorance. In this relation, Serapis becomes the trier or adversary who tests the souls of those seeking union with their immortals. The maze was also doubtless used to represent the solar system, the bull-man representing the sun dwelling in the mystic maze of its planets, moons, and asteroids. The Gnostic mysteries were acquainted with the arcane meaning of Serapis, and through the medium of Gnosticism this god became inextricably associated with early Christianity. In fact, the Emperor Hadrian, while traveling in Egypt in AD 24, declared in a letter to Servanus that the worshippers of Serapis were Christians and that the bishops of the church also worshipped at his shrine. He even declared that the Patriarch himself, when in Egypt, was forced to adore Serapis as well as Christ. See Parsons' New Light on the Great Pyramid. The little suspected importance of Serapis as a prototype of Christ can be best appreciated after a consideration of the following extract from C.W. King's Gnostics and Their Remains. There can be no doubt that the head of Serapis, marked as the face is by a grave and pensive majesty, supplied the first idea for the conventional portraits of the Saviour. The Jewish prejudices of the first converts were so powerful that we may be sure no attempt was made to depict his countenance until some generations after all that had beheld it on earth had passed away. Serapis gradually usurped the positions previously occupied by the other Egyptian and Greek gods, and became the supreme deity of both religions. His power continued until the 4th century of the Christian era. In AD 385, Theodosius, that would-be exterminator of pagan philosophy, issued his memorable edict to idolo Serapis Diruendo. When the Christian soldiers, in obedience to this order, entered the Serapeum at Alexandria to destroy the image of Serapis which had stood there for centuries, so great was their veneration for the god that they dared not touch the image lest the ground should open at their feet and engulf them. At length, overcoming their fear, they demolished the statue, sacked the building, and finally as a fitting climax to their offense burned the magnificent library which was housed within the lofty apartments of the Serapeum. Several writers have recorded the remarkable fact that Christian symbols were found in the ruined foundations of this pagan temple. Socrates, a church historian of the 5th century, declared that after the pious Christians had raised the Serapeum at Alexandria and scattered the demons who dwelt there under the guise of gods, beneath the foundations was found the monogram of Christ. Two quotations will further establish the relationship existing between the mysteries of Serapis and those of other ancient peoples. The first is from Richard Payne Knight's Symbolical Language of Ancient Art and Mythology, hence Varro, in De Lingua Latina, says that Coelum and Terra, that is universal mind and productive body, were the great gods of the Samothracian mysteries, and the same as their Serapis and Isis of the later Egyptians, the Ta'atos and Astarte of the Phoenicians, and the Saturn and Ops of the Latins. The second quotation is from Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. Says Martianus Capella, in his Hymn to the Sun, dwellers on the Nile adore as Serapis, and Memphis worships as Osiris. In the sacred rites of Persia thou art Mithras, in Phrygia, 8 eyes, and Libya bows down to thee as Ammon, and Phoenician Byblos as Adonis. Thus the whole world adores thee under different names.